First step, if you're going to do it like a pro, I'd say this, which is,
I'm not a
tell
pro.
me what you do for a living.
I do content.
Perfect. So if you do content for a living, what I'd say is don't buy a laundromat. I talk about laundromats. I actually need to change that. I need to tell somebody I bought a different first business because it's a terrible business to buy. It just was my first one and it's very easy to understand. So I'm like, if you can't understand quarter, machine, close, clean, don't buy a business, any business. Just forget you heard me talk about anything. And so that's why I talk about laundromats. But if I was going to do it the pro way, I would say you should use your unfair advantage. And if you're in the content business, don't buy a boring business in the traditional sense. Look around you. It's something I call my personal P&L review. So I'd basically look at, what do I spend money on already? If you're in content, you probably spend money on ad purchasing, right? You probably spend money on video production. You probably spend money on, maybe you rent a set space. You have all these expenses around you. And what if you could turn one or two of those expenses into an asset, not a liability? A thing that makes you money, not a thing that costs you money. And so, I did a deal back when I was doing more video production in my last company where I bought a podcast and video production company. And I did that deal basically for $0. I think I put $10,000 down for that deal that ended up doing about $300,000, $400,000 a year because I just said, I know 5 or 6 other people that could use your service. I'm going to double your revenue by introducing you to these people. And I pay you, let's say $3,000 a month now. What if we're just going to wipe that out if I can hire these other people and you're going to give me 25% of the company or whatever percentage it was? That's what I would do if I was you. So if you're young and hungry, look around you and see what you pay for and what you currently utilize already, and then try to get a percentage of that business, if not buying the whole thing. And that's sort of the pro way to do it, as opposed to car wash, need to go learn, totally different market. You can do the second, it's just a little bit riskier. Sweat equity deal or a revenue equity deal. So for a studio space, I think the probably pro way to do that would be, one, you'd approach them and you'd kind of get an understanding for their business. You'd be like, how much revenue do you make? How big is this? You'd figure out if you were material to their business. So me doing $3,000 a year with my video production guy, I was material to his business. He was only doing, $100,000 a year or something like that. And so if my $3,000 went away, that was, that's 20% of his business right there over a yearly basis. So if you go to a studio production company and they're like, yeah, we're doing $7 million a year and you're paying them $3,000, you're like, all right, cool. Anyway, nice to chat with you. Or you could say, who's the owner? How long have you been doing this? And you could dive into it. And the other side of the coin is you might find out that the owner is 70 and you become buds with the owner. And the owner loves when you come in because you're kind of young and you learn about what he does. And then you ask who's going to take over the business. And then you might say, hey, I do this other thing, but I would love to sort of be an apprentice to you in a way and potentially buy your business using future profits. And you can sort of stay on and we can stair step our way into this. But would you be open to that? Leaving your legacy to somebody like me? And so you could do it that way too. But I think it goes back to kind of the smart question you asked, which is the two avatars are who's listening to this right now. And then that's the same question to the people listening that you're going to ask the owner. What sort of avatar is the owner? And how can you become the solution to what that avatar is looking for? How can you become the son to the father? How can you become the buyer to a really anxious seller? And then you can get your deal done. I think humans defer to the paths they've seen before them. I think so often we follow in our father's or our mother's footsteps. And that's why I think the internet's really powerful, is you have an opportunity to now choose the family footsteps you want to follow into. So one, I used to think it was just a knowledge gap, but then I went to this event and I was talking to my friend about it, and she said that the facilitators did something really cool. It was a group of women, imagine 40 women in a room, right? And they're there to talk about finances. And in this room, they said, okay, everybody close your eyes. And I want you to picture money right now. And then I want you to turn your body into the shape you feel when you hear the word money, right? And so 30 women, all eyes closed, they take whatever shape. And she goes, now open your eyes and look around. And, my friend was explaining to me how most people in the room were fetal position. They were really close, somewhere on the ground, some were covering their eyes. So in a room of 30 relatively successful women, their reaction was like attack, shame, guilt for money. And she was like, and she was standing there with her arms open wide, like, give me the money. And when I think about my relationship with money, it's the same thing. I'm like, if I think about money, I'm like, yeah, it's over here. Like my hands are up, like I am here for it. But most people have this weird emotional attachment to money. And so I used to think that people on the internet, I like Tony Robbins, but like Tony Robbins or whatever, who do a lot of the motivational stuff, I kind of didn't get it. I'm like, just give me the tactics, skip the other thing. And then I realized that most people have really bad stories that they tell themselves about money. And you could tell, it'd be interesting, your next speech, you could try it. I tried it at one of mine, same thing. Men and women holding each other like they're being beaten when somebody talks about money. The average human feels that way. And so I think it all comes down to what we believe, which is hard for somebody in finance like me to say, Typically I would think, well, if you knew what to do, you could just do it. But that's not the case. It's you have to believe that you can do it. And the only way I can figure out to get more people to believe that they can do it is to show more people who are super normal or in fact below average doing the damn thing. But if I had the answer to that, that'd be the $1 million question. I read a stat in the US that only 1 in 10 people dies wealthy in the US, that most people die broke and young. And I thought that was fascinating because we're at economic high times, like lower poverty levels than ever before. But still, most people die at least without extra cash to pass on to the next generation. Yeah, it's true. Well, I actually was reading somewhere a story about in South Africa, in the slums, they have the highest concentration of the largest televisions per square foot of the houses. So that if you've been there, and I've actually never been, so I can't validate, but you will see very small little rooms with huge televisions. And I thought that was interesting, but it actually makes sense because maybe it comes down to a belief that people don't think they're ever going to get out. And so they think the only chance of getting out is going into whatever the short-term pleasure is. It's like if you never think you're going to escape your everyday reality, which is actually kind of miserable, then you're going to buy the PlayStation because why wouldn't you? Why would you save and try to get out when you've never seen anybody else get out? I also think it's hard. I remember many times where I remember checking accounts always being overdrawn and seeing the little negative pin on my, email and cell phone that you couldn't, there was nothing else in there. When I was in college and trying to figure it out before I made any money, I think I made like $37K in my first job out of college. So I definitely remember all that. But I think if you can have this belief and you can get around other humans who have had success or are striving for success, your aperture just opens in a different way. And then maybe the commercials and the ads and the things that make you feel like you want to buy all the everyday stuff go away. Like I kind of viscerally get mad when I see people who have wealth showing images of them in their Bentleys or Rolls Royces, or I have a nice watch, but like you don't see me show that shit anywhere. Like when people are showing themselves in their private planes or whatever, I just think they're missing the whole boat. And then what they're doing is they're perpetuating the PlayStation situation. They're doing it again and again, and they're doing it because it doesn't make them happy anymore to have it. That's not enough. I have to show a bunch of people I got it. And what they should actually be showing is, man, I just invested in my first stock. That's fucking cool. If you look at my stuff, it's like I have laundromats and car washes behind me all the time in them. Because that's the stuff that you should try to strive for. You can actually pass it down. It can pay you back. You can buy as many PlayStations as you want. But I think, to your point, the other thing is we are all, have you ever felt when you're around other people and they're sort of negative or they want to talk about people the whole time and like how that energy feels? That's like, it's draining, right? Even if you kind of get caught up in it, it's fun for a second. At the end, you're like, fuck, I feel kind of gross for having that convo. I think it's the same with ads and stuff that we take into us. And so they're basically creating our stories for us in social media by showing all this fancy stuff. And then we start to have this mimetic desire, this external desire and belief that we want it, that we need it, but we don't. We're just becoming a replica of the people that we're surrounding ourselves with, which are now social media. I think that's why content's so important. I think about Warren Buffett's annual shareholders meeting, right? Which you can go and attend if you own stock and you don't have to own much of it. And I think people made fun of me when I started creating content online because they were like, oh, big, successful private equity person. Now you're taking your own money. And if you really had companies that made $80 million in revenue, that means you're worth a couple $100 million bucks. And if that's the case, why would you be making Instagrams and TikToks? And that doesn't make much sense, right? And my reaction at the time was, I think we should make it just as entertaining talking about stuff that makes us money as we do stuff that costs us money. I think probably that'd be good. And if we could do that, that'd be a worthy mission. And also it'd be fun to try to do it. I don't know if we could do it, but yeah, maybe the next rap videos. And now for honestly, my favorite deals to break down are the celebrity deals because they're fascinating. Like The Rock. Have you ever looked at The Rock's content from a product perspective? Brilliant. So The Rock, if you look at his content, so let's just talk Instagram. If you go to The Rock's Instagram, I want you to count how many pieces of content he has that have product placement in them of companies he owns. And the answer is close to 80%. So almost every single post The Rock does is an ad. But what do we really see? We see sexy tequila, we see abs, we see him with his beautiful wife. Like we see these other things, but we don't realize that every single one of them is an ad. And so what if we could flip that around? Like, wouldn't it be cool if The Rock talked about the deals he did too and how he did that? Now he goes back and he talks about how he stole Snickers bars, similar to you with pizza. But I think even for celebrities, they don't want to talk about the deals that they did. They just want to talk about all the money that they have. It almost seems like faux pas somehow to talk about the deals and how good at deal making they are. Like Reese Witherspoon, billionaire now. Why? Because Reese Witherspoon, little sweet Susie Sunshine in pink, basically took a book club and said to authors, I'll give you part of my platform for you to talk about your book because I'm lovely. It's free. You're going to sell a bunch of books. It's a tiny, insignificant detail. I'd like the future rights to turn your book into a movie, and I'll pay you some sum, or I'll have a right of first refusal, aka I get the right to buy it before anybody else, and I'll pay you then for it. The author goes, amazing, Reese, of course, perfect. They come on, Reese basically A/B tests, so tests out which books do best, and depending on which books do best, Reese buys their movie rights and makes movies that create, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But Reese doesn't tell that story. Reese tells the Susie Sunshine story of her selling the books. I think the other story is more interesting and more people can learn from it. Well, my question is, who cares? I still want to know the secret sauce.
Yeah.
And so none of them are that dumb where they don't know what the deal was, right? Like, even if somebody was smarter than them, which could be, Reese may have a genius behind her, The Rock too, probably Danny Garcia, his wife, his manager. Kylie, yeah, the goat, which is weird to say about the Kardashians, but, behind them, the mom, for sure. But they're smart enough. When you create that much wealth and you do it continuously multiple times, like Reese has done with Draper James too, you definitely know what's going on. So I think sharing those secrets would be cool. But that's usually where people go. People go, well, they're famous, so it's easy for them. Or, who did the deal? And I'm like, yeah, maybe it's Scooter Braun behind the scenes, but I'd like to know how they structured that. Like, you could be like, we did this business, and maybe you could give some of it away. Like, you could be like, if The Rock makes $1 billion off of Terramana, couldn't he then say, we would never have done $1 billion deal unless you guys bought it. And because you bought it, we're going to give you some equity. We're going to allow people to buy into equity at the company at a lower valuation and have access to it. That's kind of what venture capital and crowdfunding does, right? So, they can do whatever they want to do, but I think there's so many ways to get around it. And maybe there's nothing but downside because people these days get mad when people make money. And so maybe people would hate that. But God, I think it'd make a lot more humans rich for people to be honest about how they got there, Well, first of all, cab drivers and Uber drivers are my people.
Yeah.
I love
them.
Yeah, I always chat with them. Well, and they always listen to my stuff because they know small business. Like, they have a friend that owns a laundromat, or they have a friend that works inside of a car wash or owns a car wash. These are like blue collar businesses, right? But usually what I would say to them is something I actually said to one of the guys that's with me today. I'd say, try to break your frame entirely. Most people look for individual next tactics. So they're like, what can I do over the next 1, 2, 3 years to get here? And one thing I think is really helpful to do is say, okay, you have a 3-year goal, break the frame. How could you achieve that goal in 6 months? What would be something so different, so out of the box, so big that the goal that was going to take you 3 to 6 years is now going to take you 6 months. And I want you to spend some time on that. Spend a weekend deeply thinking about that idea. Because what you're going to do is you're going to come up with ideas for the person that could be the impetus for your financial freedom, or for the business risk that's super smart, but you haven't been wanting to take it. And I think most people, they wade in the shallows of life, and you cannot have massive change by going shallow. And so I like to say, when people want an answer, I like to ask them a question, because I think they know. I think they know deep down inside, but they get scared just like I did. And so they wait years to do the thing that they knew they should have done earlier. And I don't think you need a guru or a podcast to tell you that. I think you've got to break your frame and say, I'm super capable. If I was going to do this crazy thing in 6 months, if anything was possible, if I really believed in myself, what could I do? Who could I go to that could make an unfair advantage for me? And I do think that book, Who Not How, people usually read it as leaders because it's a lot about hiring, but I think it's actually about life. And I think usually your answer to freedom is a who, not a how. Because often for hustlers and people who are going to work hard, you know 1 or 2 people who are very wealthy or who run big businesses. There are a few people in your ecosystem that you could go to and become their hustler for them. And that can lead to fantastic financial reward, because most people are not relentless in the pursuit of the things that they want. If you can be relentless, you can accomplish way more than the average person. I think it is a hack. I saw behind the curtain for the first time when I had managers and bosses who were making tens of millions of dollars a year. And I realized how little they worked, like you said, but also how average they were. I saw these largely, middle-aged dudes who were no more impressive than I was, and they were crushing it. And instead of having envy or hate for that, I was super curious. I'm like, this guy can do it. That means I can do it. And I think that's a huge unlock, actually. I was talking with another friend the other week, and I think one of the secrets to success might be when you see somebody who has more, who is doing better, who has more money, realizing that means that you can get it, as opposed to, I hate them because they have. Side of that lives nothing but opportunity. And I keep finding new rooms in the house, new curtains behind it. And I'm not sure that will ever stop. I mean, I was talking to my friend Bill Perkins the other day, who's a hedge fund manager. And Bill is very successful, huge, compound house we're walking around at. I'm like, this place is pretty nice. And he said to me, Codie, do you think that because you've been around small business for so long, small has infected your thinking? And I was like, oh God, I don't know. But then I realized to him it had, because he's got way more zeros than I do. And so those zeros become unlocks to the curtain. I mean, the other day I was flying here yesterday, and I sat next to Jeffrey Kent, the CEO and founder of Abercrombie & Kent. And he built that business up to multiple billions of dollars before selling it. He played polo with the king, is quite close with King Charles, and also has traveled the world, came from nothing in South Africa, was in a town in South Africa where there are only 100 white people, which is fascinating. Mostly was barefoot all throughout his childhood, and created the luxury travel market, essentially. And I was just sitting next to him on the airplane, and I kind of looked at his watch, and I was like, that's a nice watch. And I sort of looked at his mannerisms, and I was like, I just have a feeling this guy is worth a lot of money. And so I started chatting with him. I just said, hi, I'm Codie. Why were you in town? What were you doing in Cannes? And he lives now in Monaco. And what I thought was so interesting is when I talked to him, I said, what do you think the secret is? You're a billionaire. What is that? How do you become that? And he said, there's really one ingredient to success. And that ingredient is the thing that everybody has, but everybody wastes. Time. He's like, I ran my company for 61 years. 61 years running one company. He goes, can you imagine what the compounding looks like in 61 years focused on one thing? He goes, this generation cannot imagine. And then we went a little deeper, and I said, what do you think is the biggest difference between entrepreneurs today and entrepreneurs when you were really in the game? Because he's in his 80s now. And he said, well, back then we were explorers of the only frontier that still existed, which was business. They were the privateers asking money for the king and queen to buy a ship to go to the new land, right? Except he was doing it in a business sense. He went to China in 76 and was the first person to open up the Chinese market to travel. He broke so many bones playing polo that he had to retire at a young age. Like, they were hard men. And I think about it with us today. I think that we've become a generation of vitamin D deficient, all birds wearing, computer programming, alternative milk drinking softies in many ways. And some of my most successful friends who are worth so much monetarily, their health is not very strong, they don't adventure, and they don't have true difficulty. And I think that's the difference between his generation and ours, and between true success and not, is this idea that I'm sort of playing with like a third degree human, somebody who has a strong mind, a strong bank account, a strong body, those three things all together. And where we don't just take other people's risk, meaning take other people's money to run our business, but we take the risk ourselves. And I think his generation really did many things wrong. I don't want to glorify it, but I think they did that right. And how much more interesting is it to do these big, huge things? And maybe if you do that, you break the frame entirely. Every time I meet with a billionaire, my mind just it expands a little bit more. And I think it's the same way, like the first time you met, like my parents weren't millionaires when I was growing up. So the first time I met a millionaire, I thought, whoa, like what is this magic land? This person has so much money, they don't know what to do with it. And then you meet the first decamillionaire, and then you meet the first 100 millionaire. And at each level, not that we want to worship money or that money is all there is, but it is a scoreboard for a game that a lot of people are playing in this society. And I think it's interesting to try to get in those rooms. And these days, those rooms are open. Back when we were first doing our businesses, a billionaire didn't write a book,
do a podcast.
Or do a podcast.
Or tweet.
Or go shake your hand at a conference. That was unheard of. And now they're all around. I've found most billionaires I've met have a mission so big, it dwarfs the pain that comes with building. Because I do think it's more comfortable by and large. It's like the low, dull pain is being in a job. That's like kind of like having a little ache constantly being in a job. Being an owner, an entrepreneur, or trying to strive for billionaire status is a roller coaster ride of extreme pain at some points, or maybe you'd say extreme pain at some points, extreme pleasure. And you kind of go like this, right? You have to be able to wade through that. And so I find that most of them are the opposite of what I thought they'd be. I thought they'd just be like Scrooge McDuck, like swimming around in their riches. They'd be kind of shallow, maybe they'd be super self-interested. They'd only be focused on their own thing. They wouldn't be nice. I wouldn't want to meet them. And actually what I find, this is going to sound like a gross generalization, but most of them really want to help you up when they realize that you're hungry. Like when they see the hunger paired with the ability and willingness to take action, they want to help you. It's so rare. Like if you're listening and you have that desire, but you actually do the hard things, you're rare. You're actually really rare. Because everybody says they want it, but nobody really wants to do it. I mean, I knew I had to fire one of my employees back in the day, which made me really sad. The second that person told me that they had a bunch of debt, they were working in the business with me, obviously. They had a bunch of upside in the business, but they decided to take some of their cash and they were going to invest in a day trading thing in the stock market. And I said, I really don't think you should do that. I think if you want to take that cash and buy a business, we should talk about that. I can help you if you want to focus more on a secondary business that increases your income. But if you want to day trade, what you're telling me is that you want to get rich fast and you want to speculate, that you want to get lucky, you don't want to earn it. And anyway, they kind of laughed and then they did the thing. And that was in that moment, I knew you don't have what it takes at this level. Maybe you could change. But if you're going to make that decision now, you're telling me you're a short-term player. And long-term games with long-term people, like Naval Ravikant said, is the goal. So that's what billionaires have. They think long-term. I was actually just talking with a member of my team on the taxi on the way over here. And there's close to a billionaire that I've become friends with here. And I was like, why do you think he's invited us to do this stuff? You know who this is. And I was like, I'm not a big enough name for this. Like, there are other people. What's the thought here? And then what I think I realized is that this guy is taking a bet that I might keep growing my social platform and I might keep spending on it. And in 2 to 3 to 5 years, I might be a really big name. And because he associates with me now, when he needs something in 2 to 3 to 5 years, I'll be really big and he'll have like a remember when moment here. And he could go get a Damian John, right? And pay to do something with a Damian John. But then he doesn't have the remember when moment because Damian's already at the top, right? And so that billionaire, almost billionaire, is thinking 3 to 5 years out with a potential call option, aka a maybe possibility. How often do we do that? I don't even do that enough. And so that's where I think they're different. It's just this different scope because probably they see many curtains.